Hello, we're back to our series by the Cultural Policy Designers Network, which connects more than 35 creative industries and culture policy designers, experts, advisors, and consultants from more than 25 countries. And today we go to UK to meet our good friends David Parrish. Now, actually, I met with you, David, if you remember, in 2014 for the first time. It was in Moscow. We had this huge international conference. We just shared 2 words, and next morning when I was actually checking out the hotel, I found this little book of yours, well, not little, actually very famous, T-shirts and suits, with your little note inside. And ever since we've stayed in contact and had so many opportunities to meet. You always also written other books and materials. One of them is about strategic marketing for businesses, for creative businesses. So I'm happy to welcome you here, David. How is situation now in UK?
Hello, Ragnar, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you. And yeah, I guess in the UK there are some differences, but in other ways it's the same as many other countries, where because of the health crisis, there's also an economic crisis. Businesses have to close. We're in lockdown of different levels of severity, but generally most people are not working. They're at home or working from home if possible. And there's a real, it's quite an economic disaster, really, because the economy is so interconnected. So some sectors are suffering more than others. Entertainment and leisure suffering very badly. And of course, a lot of the creative industries fall into that category. But then, there are other areas within the creative industries that are booming, especially those who are digitizing, putting things online, doing e-commerce shops. Some of those are actually booming. And indeed, computer games and other digital products are either surviving or even thriving at this time. So it's a very mixed picture here in the UK. And we're just hoping that we can all stay safe, stay well, and survive the health crisis, so that we can rebuild the economy and indeed the creative economy.
David, you've been working with hundreds and hundreds of creative businesses. What has, and you know them inside out. You've advised them on their business plans, their marketing plans. Has the crisis and the impact that the crisis have had to culture creative sectors, and also the way that the culture creative businesses have reacted to the crisis, has any of this surprised you in any way, both positive or negative?
Well, as you say, my focus is to work with individual businesses. I'm a creative industries consultant. But unlike some people who work at a more strategic level with governments and policy, I tend to work at the entrepreneurial level with individual businesses. And consequently, as you say, I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of businesses over the years in the UK and indeed around the world. So I'm familiar with the struggles that they have, the position they have. I think that the crisis has caught everybody by surprise. Certainly on the economic front. And so businesses in all sectors are really struggling and are really badly affected. And in that sense, creative businesses are no different. They can't do their work normally. Their income is often disrupted or reduced to zero, and yet they still have the expenses to pay. So they are part of the larger crisis. What I'm seeing is that there's certainly creativity in the creative industries, in the sense of what people do in their studios, whether it's dance or photography or film or architecture or music. But now there has to be an increase of creativity in the business office. And you know, in terms of the business model, dealing with customers differently, calculating prices differently, even producing new products or services, maybe adapting existing things. We see this in all fields of the economy, but it's happening also in the creative industries, where we have to go online and do things. We have to generate income in different ways. Sometimes we do things for free because it's not easy to monetize some things. So there's a whole mixture of things going on. And I think that we're seeing an increased level of creativity in the business models and in how organizations and enterprises adapt.
I'm so interested in the fact that, as you mentioned, you worked with creative companies, hundreds, if not thousands of them. So if I'm a aspiring creative professional, doing my first steps, setting up my creative company, maybe following those steps that you write about in your book. And this is a book that, or the steps that are in a sense general, that that anyone could follow. What kind of a perspective, in your opinion, should be taken in this crisis when developing or modifying your business models? What is not written in this book, and maybe should be added if there would be an annex called operating during the crisis like COVID-19?
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. And as you say, the book gives some general points about building a business. I also, apart from the two books that you kindly mentioned, I also have something I call a toolkit, called Designing Your Creative Business. And this is like a booklet, 20 pages, which is like a workbook. And I use it on training courses, and you can use it in conjunction with t-shirts and suits. And again, it's a step-by-step approach to building a business. What do you want to achieve? What is your definition of success? What are your talents and your passions? Who are your competitors? And which markets are suitable for you? So step by step. And at the moment, I think that we're in an era or a position where many businesses are redesigning their creative business. So in many ways, we have to go back to first principles. We might have built a business on assumptions around travel, around international working or audiences, or something that no longer is working, or not for the moment. Indeed, my own business is very international and I can't travel. So the actual business formula I've put together isn't working right now. So we have to go back to basics, to go back to the first chapter, shall we say, of t-shirts and suits, of designing your creative business, and start again. And I think a good starting point for any business is to find a problem and to solve it. That's always a good way to build a startup. Put even more simply, it's about being useful. How can I be useful? And many people are thinking that way right now at the level of citizens and being part of a community and neighbors and families. And industry is asking the same question. How can we be useful? Normally, we make fashion items, a factory might ask, but nobody's buying clothes right now. So can we make instead masks and gowns? How can we be useful? And I think everybody is struggling to do this. And that's the first question, because if we ask how we can be useful, it helps us to identify, on the one hand, market needs, and on the other hand, our special skills. And those are two elements of any business formula. So we have to go right back to basics. Right now, I can't be useful by flying to Oman or Abu Dhabi to speak at a conference, but I can be useful by making a presentation online. I can be useful to my clients, even though I can't meet them, by providing advice and support and information. So I think the fundamental question is, how can we be useful? That's a very ordinary, a plain way of saying, what value can I add? Because every business or organization has to have that fundamental value and connect it with customers, audiences, or clients. So it is a time, I think, to go back to square one. It means that the assumptions we've made and the practices we've developed may not be valid, but the step-by-step approach that I advocate in T-shirts and suits and designing your creative business is still valid. We just have to go back and start again from a different starting point, dealing with a different business and world environment. So I think it's an opportune time to redesign our creative businesses. Some will unfortunately go bankrupt and have to start again absolutely from scratch. Others will be fine because their model happens to suit the circumstances of this crisis. But there are many, most of them are in the middle, where they have to adjust, at least adjust or adapt in some way their business model. And the guides and the simple, basic, eternal principles that I talk about still apply. The same questions apply, but the answers now are different.
You're absolutely right. A famous quote says that we should not let this crisis to be wasted. As we all know, many of the greatest business models are actually started from the times of crisis. So it is a powerful force in itself. But my question, actually, I know that you're not a fortune teller, but what do you think? How many of those changes that businesses are taking in right now, and maybe turn to the more digital transformations, how much of that will be sustained, and how much of that will change the way we understand the world or our sectors for a very long time, maybe forever? And how much of that is just seen as a temporary thing?
Again, a very good question. Not easy to answer, and I can't see into the future. But I can say that we are going through very big fundamental changes, and as a result, I think right now some businesses are doing temporary changes, just tactical changes to earn some money in a different way. Thinking that everything will return to normal at some point. But I don't think things will ever return to exactly the old normal. There will become a new normal. And within businesses, some of them will go bankrupt and start again, or the individual people and assets will be reformed. So I use the analogy of a Lego kit. Maybe you've built a cathedral out of Lego as a hobby, and then one day it's destroyed. You still have the pieces to build again. And I think that there will be transformation and that the pieces will come together in a different way. That's at the most radical end, destruction and new creativity, new formations of assets and people into different companies, different institutions. But I think also a lot of the changes that people think are temporary will become permanent. That, people will discover new things. And indeed, as you said, there are opportunities. We can say, as you mentioned earlier, never waste a crisis. And in a similar vein, they say that the Chinese word for crisis is made up of two words, danger and opportunity. And clearly there is danger. We feel that danger. Some people are impacted very badly by that danger, but there's certainly opportunity. And I think that as I speak to entrepreneurs, they're very worried, but some of them are saying, this is what I need. This gives me a fantastic opportunity to make the changes to my business I needed to make anyway. And so I think for some people it will be very painful. Other people it will be an experiment or even fun project to change their business. I think others will look back as we might look back on a divorce. And we all know people who said, 3 years ago, I was divorced. At the time, it was horrible, tears and heartbreak and pain. But looking back, I have a new life, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And I think that many businesses, if I think optimistically, many businesses will look back on that way. The crisis of 2020 forced them to make changes, to become more digital, perhaps, or to get rid of elements of their business that just weren't working, but they were too scared to cut them off. And a lot of them will emerge stronger after a process that is going to be difficult, sometimes painful, not always smooth, but ultimately a creative process.
Absolutely. David, your phone must be ringing all the time with questions from different types of creative businesses that you work with, whether they're designers, musicians, film producers, game developers. What are the maybe 2-3 most common questions, very practical questions that these kind of creative companies have, and what's the common answer that you give them in these times?
Well, one thing that comes to mind as you speak, and a very immediate thing, is that people were wondering, and really worrying about cash flow, about running out of money. And it's no coincidence that one of the very first webinars I gave several weeks ago now was in Liverpool at a creative hub, Baltic Creative Community Interest Company. And my presentation was all about cash flow management, because clearly there are cash flow issues, and a lot of the smaller businesses and freelancers, they live from hand to mouth. They're really worried, but they don't have a means to map out or calculate exactly what the position is. And so one of the training workshops I've developed about creative finance actually provides a simple spreadsheet that people can use. And so I give that on my workshops, and I've actually published that free of charge on my website for the people who attended that webinar and for anybody else who wants to download it. Now, I know a lot of bigger businesses and more sophisticated organizations already have good cash flow projection systems, and I don't want to talk down to them. But I also know that for many creative businesses and creative people, finance is not their natural strength. They love doing the creative work at the studio. The stuff in the office, including contracts and intellectual property and financial management, is often regarded as a bit boring, and they do as little of it as possible. So that's one immediate level of support, because people are saying, I'm really worried, I think I'm going to run out of money, but I don't know whether I can survive for a week, a month, or 3 months before I need to do something. And a cash flow projection, a very simple financial tool, spreadsheet, is, I know, extremely useful in getting our heads around the reality of understanding actually how long we have got before we go into the red. But also it allows us to look at different scenarios and play with what if. What if I can get a grant from the government? What if we can generate income this way? What if I can negotiate with my landlord and delay paying the rent? And in that way, we can map out our cash flow. So that's, the most urgent calls are about how will we survive financially? And the cash flow management is part of that. But then other people are looking at how can we start a new service? How can we keep in touch with our customers? What can we do for our customers, even though our customers have no money right now? And there I'm advising that we have to be useful. And some of my clients who pay me every month can't afford to do that right now. But I'm not going to abandon them, partly because I'm a nice guy and it's not a decent, honest, gentlemanly thing to do, but also because it's not good for business. And so this is a time actually to show to build the relationships with customers, to keep our existing customers, and perhaps even win new ones. Because in a crisis, you find out who your friends are. We know this at a personal level. Some friends just run away. They were fair weather friends. And I think we're finding that with businesses. And we can see that, throughout the economy, business reputations are being, on the one hand, enhanced when they do the right thing for their employees or their communities. And we see that some reputations are being destroyed because all businesses say that the best asset we have are our people. This becomes almost like a cliche, and yet you see how people really behave. So I think this is the test. This is the time to strengthen our relationships with our clients, to be useful as much as we can by adapting what we can do, and showing what our values and what we're made of in terms of our beliefs and our value systems. So I think cash flow and financial management is the most urgent thing I get calls about. And then how to deal with customers, keep customers, what do we do when we can't meet customers is another one. And then thirdly, the more transformational thing of, David, can we talk about redesigning our creative business? Because this is a time, an opportunity to do exactly that.
Thank you, Ian. It's also really interesting to hear that the problems, the challenges, the questions that creatives are worried about at these very difficult times are very similar in different countries. So that's also one of the reasons why people like us need to stick together and also prepare ourselves to be the most useful to them. I know that you are the most one of the most approachable people around. You have so many materials on your website, so also I recommend everybody to have a look. Your books are on your websites, available for free, ebooks to download. And you're always ready to answer questions as well. David, to finish, again, you're not a fortune teller, but if I would call you in a year from now, so May 2021, what do you think the world would look like?
Like you say, it's hard to say. It's hard to say about the timescale. I mean, I hope at some point there will be a vaccine for COVID-19, and then the world will be more able to turn back to some kind of normality. But whether that is 1 year or 6 months or 2 years, I don't know. So if I rephrase your question and say, what will the new normal be like at some point, maybe not exactly in 12 months, then I think various things will have changed. I think international travel will still be more difficult because it will be more expensive and perhaps more restricted, certainly more expensive. So, that benefit that we all have, whether it's for business or for leisure, of flying around the world, and I know you do a lot of that, Ragnar, and I do too. I think that's not going to be quite so easy in the future. At the same time, we're all discovering how much we can achieve online. And in all kinds of businesses, instead of having conferences and meetings, they're using Zoom. I just wish I'd bought shares in Zoom 6 months ago. So I think we won't be as completely working from home as we are now, but we'll settle back to some halfway position between the regular offices and the working from home. I think that will change. And there will be so much more digital products and digital services created through this process, which will remain. So those are the changes I can see. And I think maybe also people will be more focused on quality of life rather than simple, just manic consumerism. Because one thing people have discovered, and I know that you have yourself from our other conversations, and so have I, is that the simplicity of life is sometimes the best. We don't have to go out to the shopping malls buying stuff all the time. Just being at home with family, playing with the kids, cooking, gardening, taking a walk in the park if we're allowed to in our lockdowns. These are the most valuable things, and community as well. So I think that maybe people will go back to basics and think about quality of life rather than mad consumerism. And that is both in some ways a danger, but I think largely an opportunity for the creative and cultural industries. So I think we're heading for better times eventually. Exactly when, I don't want to bet.
Thank you, David. It was such a pleasure to talk to you again. We will do this soon. Hopefully your predictions hold. I would love to live in a world in May 2021, like you described. But until then, stay well and stay negative.
Absolutely. And nice to see you, Ragnar. Thank you very much indeed. And you also. Take care. Stay safe.